You're listening to Geoversity Podcast. I'm Brad Hillis, the editor of Geoversity. A layman's talk is an important part of a PhD candidate's defense of their thesis. It's usually a talk of about 10 to 15 minutes, and it presents the essence of a candidate's research in an accessible way that family and friends in attendance can understand. So for this ongoing series, we're inviting PhD candidates who are either about to graduate or who've recently defended their theses to come in and deliver their layman's talk. My first guest for this series is Brian Masinde, who came in to tell us about his research on accountable geo-intelligence.
My research is on accountable geo-intelligence. In summary, it's about the responsible use of geodata and AI, but particularly in the context of humanitarian action. So a little bit of a longer title to give it a little bit more context. It is also mechanisms for protecting demographically identifiable information in humanitarian geo-intelligence workflows. At the very center of my research project is this concept called demographically identifiable information, and it had just emerged as an ethical blind spot when it comes to the use of AI and geodata for humanitarian action. By definition, demographically identifiable information is any data that enables classification, identification, or tracking of groups. So my research is divided into 5 themes. One is geo-intelligence workflows, which is where I ask which demographically identifiable information arise from geo-intelligence workflows. And the second is on humanitarian principles. And the primary concern there is how does the creation and use of demographically identifiable information impact humanitarian principles. The third theme is on group privacy, and I ask how does demographically identifiable information shift the conversation from individual privacy to group privacy. Fourth theme is on biases, and particularly how do biases from demographically identifiable information emerge in geo-intelligence workflows. Overall, it's about finding mechanisms for accountability, particularly how to effectively protect demographically identifiable information to ensure accountability within the humanitarian action and or sphere. To give a little bit more of context, geo-intelligence workflows entail collection, processing, and dissemination of geodata to assist in disaster preparedness and management. A good example is using drones or unmanned aerial vehicles and artificial intelligence for disaster mapping. And some of the core objectives here are to use it for predictive humanitarian action, including impact-based forecasting and forecast-based financing. Impact-based forecasting just entails predicting or quantifying the impact of disasters, for example, natural hazards such as drought, flooding, earthquakes, and so on. So for my research, I particularly focused on the impact-based forecasting aspect of humanitarianism. Some good examples of demographically identifiable information from geodata include drone images where you can get or infer wealth, income. You can infer cultural practices like what types of food do people grow. You can infer if people tend to live in clusters or in communities or way further apart. You can infer ethnicity as well based on the building typologies that are used, and if you're aware of the context, of course. Second example is street view images, where you can also still infer wealth or income. You can infer cultural practices. In a disaster risk management setting, you can infer the physical vulnerability to hazards, like how susceptible is a particular type of building to any kind of natural hazard. And then there's also your typical data collection forms or databases, where you can collect very personal information from vulnerable households. For example, you can get household social vulnerability, for example, if there are any elderly, what health issues they have, what's the general or average income of the household. You can also still infer ethnicity or religion, for example, from the surnames, which is very, very common in particular geographical context where you can infer someone's ethnicity just from their surname. But given this context and given all these examples of geodata and the kinds of demographically identifiable information that can be derived from them, however, humanitarianism does not operate in a vacuum. There are several principles that humanitarians have to abide by when they serve vulnerable communities. For my research, I focused on the principles of humanity and impartiality because these are on the day-to-day operation and how they interact with vulnerable communities. So, for example, on humanity, this aims to alleviate suffering, protect life, and ensure human dignity. And we find that privacy violations compromise the humanity principle. And on impartiality, this ensures that aid is given only on a needs basis, free from bias. So biases end up diverting aid from the very vulnerable, right? So the other principles, for example, neutrality or independence, materialize more as governance issues and also power dynamics between humanitarians and, for example, funders and governments. So then the big question becomes, how can we effectively protect demographically identifiable information in order to uphold humanitarian principles in Geo-Intelligence workflows? And two main concerns which are aligned to the principles that we're most interested in will be privacy because of the humanity principle, will be biases because of the impartiality principle. So to start off with, one main concern will be on privacy. Just given from the name and the definition of demographically identifiable information, it's about tracking or re-identification of groups. So you see, it shifts the conversation from individual privacy to more on the group privacy part. Over the years, humanitarians have been collecting a lot of data on very vulnerable communities. But the conversation had been, how can we effectively protect individual privacy? Which means, how can we protect someone's name, someone's phone number, someone's email for tracking them, for example, right? But when it comes to demographically identifiable information, and particularly in the context of AI, we realize that AI does not really care about your personal data most of the time. Of course, depends on the task, but often it's about which particular group can I place you into so that I can make a decision. For example, what to sell to you, for example, how to make you behave in a particular way. So in our research project, or in my research project, I looked at group privacy from the lens of informational harms. That is, what could possibly go wrong when we use group data. And one of the concerns was biases, so you can have discriminatory group inferences. The second was on mosaicing, where it's just emerging that combining several data sets, even if they seemingly are unrelated, can reveal more information on groups than individual data sets. The second, or the third perhaps, is a flawed cost-benefit analysis, where we tend to put more value on individual privacy, that is protecting someone's name, protecting their address perhaps, or their phone number or email. But we forget about what the group level concerns in terms of privacy will be, or we deem it lesser. Bear in mind also, in many cultures outside of the West, people associate more as a group than as individuals. So by that, it follows that people will be more concerned about their privacy as a group rather than just as an individual. And then the fourth will be on misuse. So what could this data and this Geo-Intelligence workflows be used outside of the humanitarian scope? Because again, emphasizing that this is data about the very most vulnerable people in society. And for their lack of power, given their circumstances, it's hard for them to push not to have their data misused by, let's say, governments or, let's say, big corporations, where it can be used to make them, to nudge them to vote a particular way, or to buy a little bit more than they need or spend money on things that they might not need. So when it comes to mechanisms for accountability with regards to group privacy, I developed a geodata triage that can be used to protect vulnerable communities from group privacy informational harms. This triage, it's inspired by triage in emergency medicine and in disaster management, because in medicine, when you go to the hospital, someone assesses how severe your symptoms are, and they decide, should you get admitted, should you just go home, for example, with a prescribed medication, or do you need to go straight to surgery? Similarly, in disaster management, they assess how much aid does a person need. So triage is within the context of very limited resources. And this triage ensures that humanitarians can go about their mandate while also ensuring that they protect the privacy of vulnerable communities. This triage starts by assessing the kinds of demographically identifiable information that are feasible from that particular Geo-Intelligence workflow. It's centered on context awareness, because if context changes, for example, from just being simply a natural disaster case to civil strife, for example, or political strife, then there comes the issue of safety and where people can have to flee their homes, right? So those are two different contexts with various different levels of severity or implications for their well-being. It's also a continuous monitoring system with interventions, and it's iterative by design. So that means it's not a one-way, a one-off checklist which can cause ethics whitewashing. So it's iterative to make sure that humanitarians are always abreast with the kinds of risks possible. But at the very least, it ensures that due diligence is done. For example, through data minimization, making sure that you only collect what you need. You not collect more info in the pretext that, it might be useful in the future for reasons that you cannot immediately articulate. And it ensures that information is securely stored, no unauthorized access, and also ensures that this data is only shared with organizations or people that share the principles and values of the humanitarian field. The second concern is on biases. So a big question is, how does the use of AI for humanitarianism make groups of people visible or invisible, right? And a good example we had was from a Geo-Intelligence in Karonga, Malawi, where it was used to predict or to categorize vulnerable households from due to flooding. And we were using drone images to identify the different types of building in the area. And it emerged that AI, or the Geo-Intelligence workflow, did particularly well in identifying buildings made out of iron sheets, but did relatively poorly when it came to identifying buildings made of thatch. So you see, households that live in thatch either misidentified as something else, for example, as a flooded plain, or they're not identified at all. So they are made wrongly visible, and they are also made invisible at the same time. So mechanism for accountability when it comes to biases is auditing. And this auditing can be done at several stages. It can be just immediately humanitarian developers get the results of their Geo-Intelligence workflows in the test phase. It can also be done after it has been used once or twice to serve a particular community where the community can also be involved. So this auditing creates a forum where stakeholders can investigate how Geo-Intelligence workflow works, how it unfairly affects different groups of people. But we also found it does need a critical audience for it to work well. And one aspect of auditing will be auditing the model itself, the AI model itself. And this simply means scrutinizing the model card, where you check how it performs for different demographic groups. So if you're familiar with the AI metrics, this is considering the precision, the recall, the accuracy for the different classification groups. The second will also be auditing the data sheets. So how is this data collected? Which kind of groups are involved? Which groups are misrepresented or underrepresented? So in essence, one can check if the data was collected fairly. In my research, I also considered causal AI, how causal AI can be used to overcome biases, but this time by design. So a bottom-up approach. So we are trying to avoid a situation where we're only trying to play catch-up to the potential problems of biases when it comes to Geo-Intelligence workflows. So perhaps you've heard about the phrase correlation does not equal causation. And there are many, many examples of association or correlation-based AI systems that were biased towards various demographic groups. So at the core of the causal AI is this concept called directed acyclic graphs, which are just nodes and edges that show the relationship between variables. So if you've got a data set with various variables and you want to model or create an AI model, you can specify how each variable relates to the other using this directed acyclic graph. One good example or one case study that I had for the research was in predicting impact of tropical cyclones in the Philippines. But other than being able to specify the causal relationship, what the causal effects in the artificial intelligence models, you can also ask counterfactual questions which can be used to assess if biases are present in the model, right? So counterfactuals are what-if questions that where one imagines a world or a hypothetical world where things could have been different. So, for example, if it's a hiring system and you want to check if there is bias against women, for example, you can find a particular record or observation where the gender of the person was female, and then you just change that particular aspect and you say, okay, what if they were male? Will they have gotten the job? And if they will have gotten the job only based on that change from female to male, that implies a bias. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks to Brian for sharing his research, and thank you for listening to Geoversity Podcast. Join us again in future for more layman's talks from PhD candidates from the ITC faculty, as well as other faculties at the University of Twente. And if you'd like to explore more content that makes scientific research accessible, check out our website, geoversity.io.